Welcome back to the very first Chatting with Nuts of 2023. I want to wish you all a happy new year. We're a few weeks in, but it's better late than never. And I am joined for the 46th episode of this show tonight by Josh from Red Fury Books. Josh, how are you, my friend?
I had a long week, but I'm excited to be here and just talk about books. This will be a good end to a week that was kind of stressful because of work. So looking forward to it.
I feel you on that. We were kind of talking before, how was your week? Not great, but this is hopefully a launching point for me to turn it around, and maybe we can turn it around for you and put us on a good path for a solid weekend, a long weekend. We both have Monday off, so that's awesome. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of decompress and talk about something I actually enjoy, because way too much work stuff this week and other stuff in my life going on. So it's always good to kind of escape and get lost in some books. When I'm not reading, I'm doing stuff for the channel. So it all kind of revolves around literature one way or another, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
So for those who may not know you, why don't you tell them what you do, what you read, and what are you all about?
Okay, well, I'm Josh. My day job is I'm a music educator and lifelong musician, but also a lifelong reader. And what I do on my channel is I talk about a lot of different books. I, of course, love fantasy, so I'm part of the fantasy community a bit here, but I generally read 3 to 5 different genres every month. And I love fantasy. I love historical fiction. I love science fiction. I read some nonfiction. I kind of dabble between a lot of things. And for me, that's how I'm able to read so much. I generally read about 100 books a year. Last year, I read 124, which was too many, actually. But one reason I don't really get into very many reading slumps or anything like that, because I'm always switching genres and keeps it fresh for me. But I put out about, I don't know, 4 to 6 videos a month on my channel. And I just generally try to talk about books that I love. I don't try to waste too much time on the books that I don't enjoy unless it's part of my monthly wrap-ups. But I guess that's kind of Red Fury Books in a nutshell.
I like it. In a nutshell. Well phrased.
I knew I had to work it in at some point. So.
I commend you for it. That was solid branding there. Yeah, man, you read a lot of different stuff. It's one of the things that I enjoy. One of the reasons why I enjoy watching your videos and listening to you talk about books is the fact that you do spread it out. You're not just in fantasy or sci-fi. You're doing it all. You did Shogun earlier last year, and you really enjoyed it. And that was kind of one of the kickstarts for me to start thinking about, like, when am I going to fit Shogun in? It's not going to be this year, probably, because I got some other stuff to do, but it does seem like more people in our sphere here on YouTube are jumping into Shogun. So that's probably pretty exciting for you. I'm sure you want more people to talk about it with.
It's really cool because, yeah, on the Grimoire, they're doing the read along of Shogun and they're spreading it out over 3 months, which I'm all for, because it's going to be great to I just sit there and watch all the conversations and interject here and there, and just seeing people discover the book's fantastic. Because when I read it last January, I didn't know anybody that read Shogun. So the only people I interacted with was, when I did my review, the people in the comments section. So it's so cool to see on Discord everybody enjoying the book and having questions about the book and questioning aspects of the book and so forth. And the conversations have been a lot of fun, just as someone who's not reading it right now, but it's only been a year, so everything's pretty fresh in my mind.
Yeah, it's always nice to get to relive a book while other people experience it, and it kind of can jog your memories and remind you and bring new perspective to it too, which is really great. What was your favorite thing about Shogun as a piece of work? Was it the writing, overall?
No, it was just thematically the cross-cultural connection and the learning, especially from this main character who's a European, learning about the Japanese. And it's really interesting because you see, especially early in the book, when they're showing point of views from both sides, the other side, they're just simply barbarians. The Europeans are calling the Japanese barbarians. The Japanese are calling Blackthorn and all of his people barbarians. But then you see how they start to learn from each other, and they start to learn aspects of each other's culture that isn't barbaric and might be better than their own culture. And I love that aspect of it. That was easily my favorite thing about that book.
Yeah, and I think that is very historical, right? That's something that happens quite a bit, is the clash and then some sort of like meshing of two cultures or societies, and then what we get afterwards is hopefully a better version of both of those things. But it's unfortunate, though. It does feel like when it comes to humans, it's always war first, right? It's always
Yeah.
conflict
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. Xenophobia is a big thing for sure. I mean, you always fear the other or hate the other, but that aspect of the story was great. And then there's actually a nonfiction book I read right after Shogun called Learning from Shogun or something like that. And it's basically a bunch of historians talking about the book, where talking about Eastern history, Western fantasy. What did the book get right? What did the book get wrong? And turns out most of the book was pretty accurate as far as a lot of things happening in Japan in the 1600s. They were pretty complimentary. There were, of course, of some fabrications, but it's historical fiction for a reason. You know, it's not a it's not a retelling, but that reinforced for me how much I enjoyed the book, because I loved the aspect of especially seeing Blackthorn learn from the Japanese and starting to appreciate the things that he never considered as a European, that they did better than what he was experiencing in Europe.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating, and it's been such a legendary book for so long. It's definitely been added to my list, and I'm kind of anxiously awaiting to see other people's reactions. One of them happens to be Tall Guy Reads. Alex over there, he says, "Hey, everyone, just started
Yeah,
Shogun yesterday and enjoying it." I want to see after we get a little bit further. I want to see who drops off. That's what I want to see, because this is a long book. This
it
is a
is.
big read along for a lot of people, and I'm curious to see who sticks it out all the way to the end.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that drew it to me. One of my favorite books of all time is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. And ever since I read that book, I was kind of just looking for that next epic length historical novel. And Lavelle certainly filled that void. I don't just love epic fantasy. I guess I love epic historical fiction too, because Shogun fit that bill really well.
Yeah, I was talking about this actually with a guy that I do jujitsu with. He watches the channel. It's crazy. So I started talking about jujitsu, about books, and he's like, "Oh," I told him about the YouTube channel. He gets onto it, and now he's coming into the gym saying, "Did you watch Critical Dragon's latest video? Did you watch Philip Did you watch Joanna?" And I'm like,
Amazing.
it's weird, because I'm actually pretty I get what's the word I'm looking for. I'm very intentional about like kind of separating pieces of my life and not
Sure.
cross pollinating a ton.
Yeah.
But I get excited. I can't shut up, and that's just who I am. It's who I've always been. A bit of an oversharer at times as well. And when I'm there and I'm just talking about books, like, you guys got to check this out. It's dope. And so yeah, he he ends up watching the YouTube channel. But we and him were talking right before class. We were stretching out, and I was talking about fantasy, and like we were talking about Oathbringer, which I won't spoil anything for anyone, but I was talking about Stormlight Archive, big epic fantasy series. And I was talking about some of the things that I really liked about Stormlight and some of the things that I didn't like as much. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you're talking about like historical fiction, epicness, right? And like kind of like through the years, there's like a lineage and generations, and it feels like there's this weight right behind it of all this history. And for me, my favorite fantasy is also like that. I have found that the few fantasies that actually take the time to kind of dive into history of the world, of the people, of different cultures are my favorites. Like A Song of Ice and Fire, Tolkien, like those are the ones that really do a lot for me. Even to a lesser extent, I would say that like Dandelion Dynasty is very generational, and a lot of time passes, and they talk about a lot of the old myths in the world. So for me, I think that that's one of the reasons why I want to check out a little bit more historical fiction, because I happen to be a person that is kind of drawn to fantasy that pulls from not just from their like real history, but also the in-world history as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you mentioned the world building, and you mentioned Tolkien, of course, because he's always part of that conversation. But yeah, I've read Lord of the Rings 4 times in my life now. And the fourth time, every time it was different, but the fourth time, that's what struck me most about the Lord of the Rings, was just the richness of the world and how real and how deep it all felt. And that's what I loved most about it at that point. And that's what I'm hoping to be getting out of this Malazan read that we're doing as well, too. So we'll see. I just finished Gardens of the Moon last night, so I'm 1/10 of the way in. So
Well, can we get a candid first response, like reaction here?
yeah, I think I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 on my scale there. I loved aspects of it. I loved some of the scenes. I loved some of the characters. I will admit in front of all of you here, I made one big mistake with this. I didn't know until I got to the end that there was a glossary.
Oh,
And that would have helped so much, because you know how Erickson, he drops a proper name about something and then doesn't explain it for chapters later. And it
Mhm.
just causes confusion. And then even when you see it chapters later, you may not remember what it was. Whether it's, for me, it was the factions and the creatures. I had trouble just keeping track of what everything was. If I would have known that the glossary was there, it probably would have been a 4 out of 5 at least, instead of 3.5. But I liked it enough that I'm very excited to read Deadhouse Gates, and I know it's a different part of the world, so it'll be different characters. And then I can't wait to get to the third book, because I think the characters from Gardens of the Moon are back in the third book. I think that's how that works. I guess I'll
Yeah,
find out,
yeah.
but
You'll have characters reappear, and sometimes they run into each other. Um, but a 3.5. I mean, it was wonderful talking to you tonight. I hope that you have a good week. No, I'm just kidding.
right.
Yeah, Gardens of the Moon can be a little bit of a rough one for people. I do believe the Dead House Gates, especially like knowing what you enjoy, especially with historical fiction, I feel pretty confident that Dead House Gates is going to really resonate with you. I think it's a
Yeah.
much better book than Gardens of the Moon.
Well, and that's what I had been seeing just on people talking about it, how Gardens of the Moon is usually a lot of people's lowest rated book in the series. So if 3.5 is about as low as it gets, but again, part of that's my fault for not knowing there was a glossary. But yeah, no, there's definitely enough there. I'm still excited about this series. I have a feeling, you have certain feelings when you read certain books that
Mhm.
it's going to be for you. And I have a feeling this is going to be a series for me. It's just not there yet, but I
Yeah.
just started the journey. There's a long way to go.
Yeah, there's definitely like a light switch moment for a lot of readers. It doesn't happen to everybody, right? I still think for how very popular the book series is, it sold millions of copies. I do still think it's relatively like a small audience that is going to read it and say this is my favorite thing of all time. Um, there's a light switch moment in there for a lot of people. Sometimes it's book 2, sometimes it's book 3. One thing that Gardens of the Moon has an interesting like lineage is the fact that it's a screenplay first, and I do think, especially with like almost like vignettes, like pieces of the story, like I'm thinking of Rooftop Things. Like I
Mhm.
felt like those were very screenplay actiony type
Yeah.
things. Obviously, they're putting into a narrative in a novel event at some point, but I do think that you can kind of feel that a little bit. Whereas Dead House Gates, for me, especially in the themes, are just really incredible. It stretches a lot of people on how far they can extend their empathy towards certain characters. And I think it also challenges your perspective as a reader quite a bit. And if you're someone who, enjoys to do that and kind of put yourself in the place of these characters and what they're going through and why they are the way they are, think that it could really resonate with you and many other people as well. So I'm excited for you to read Dead House Gates for sure.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that, because I did enjoy the characters, and I had no problem keeping the characters, differentiated, with the exception of there were a couple of the bridge burners that I confused each other a little bit. But
Yeah.
besides that, I was pretty clear on everybody. And I just found it interesting how a lot of them were opposed, and Erickson made you kind of want both sides to be the winner in some of the clashes and everything. But there's definitely a lot of good in there for me to go forward.
Yeah, definitely. I get a lot of messages and people ask me, what are your tips for getting into Malazan? And it's so strange to me because like other than like things like Ulysses by James Joyce or Paradise Lost, you don't really hear a lot of like give me tips on how to read this. So I'd always just tell me like just read it. Like you just read it and you pick
Yeah.
up what you pick up, and it is a series that is really great for a reread, but that doesn't mean that you have to reread it to get something out of it. I don't think that that's the case at all. I think it's there if you would like to. I think it's a great value for the money because you could read them probably 100 times and find something new.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always tell people just read them. Just read it and see. And you said, oh, I got confused on some things, but overall, like there was a story told to you and you understood A to
Mhm.
B, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I keep thinking Matt on Books had a great video a couple months ago about it. And one thing that he said was, if you think of it as a mystery, maybe the confusing parts aren't going to be quite as I guess frustrating
Yeah, you're
for
not
some people.
supposed to know everything,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And I
So
do think that can
yeah,
be frustrating because sometimes as readers, we want a lot of control. Like we want to know every single thing that's
yeah,
going on.
yeah.
Whereas this is definitely one of those works that kind of pushes you to take your hands away from the wheel and let the author do his thing. And I think with when we're talking about like history, world building and stuff like that, some of the stuff that ends up coming out and connecting is just like mind boggling later in the
Well,
series.
I can't wait. I already saw just because I'd already heard thematically there's always a lot of convergence of these books, and I loved when that started happening at the end, because it happened so well. And the other thing that surprised me about the book is I always heard so many people talk about how difficult it was, and I guess part of me, I translated that thinking it would be like a dense read, but I didn't feel it was a dense read at all. I
Hmm.
felt just a lot of the terminology and things like that, the proper names was what was giving me issues. But I thought his writing style was very accessible, very beautiful at times, and so I have no doubts I'm going to be continuing and enjoying the series.
Yeah, well,
Really,
I'm glad. I'm glad that it was at least good enough for you to continue.
yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
for
me happy
sure.
because I think that there's a lot of really good stuff. I mean, Memories of Ice is absurd. It's the most typical epic like fantasy book out of all 10 in my opinion.
Yeah,
But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It kind of shows like
yeah,
if Erickson wants to, like he can do that. Like he can very much kind of jive with the genre of fantasy and deliver something that's pretty epic. And then later on down the line, I mean, it's just some of the most inventive craziness you've ever seen. It's
well,
wild.
there was one scene at the end of this one where about 40 pages from the end, something happened with one of the characters, and I just did one of these, like, what? Didn't see that happening. And so yeah, I can't wait for the twists and turns. And I mean, the biggest draw for me with Malazan is just that I know a lot of people DNF the series, but it seems like the people that almost everybody that finishes the series, they all rave about it. So there's obviously something there because everybody that finishes this series just seems so enamored with it and sings its praises and wants you to love it too. So I want to find out what it's all about. So
Yeah.
that's why we're taking this journey. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth at least a shot. And I'm biased, but my favorite content on the booktubes is actually Malazan content.
Yeah.
To me, it has always inspired my favorite creativity from my favorite creators.
Yeah.
There are series that I love to death that I just don't care to like. The discussions around it aren't as appealing. It's strange. It's strange, right? Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? Like there are series that you can
yeah.
hold so close to your heart, but they just don't inspire you to want to have conversation about it.
Yeah.
For me, I'm thinking of First Law. Like First Law doesn't really do a bunch for me when it comes to like I'm gonna do a bunch of discussions for these books or anything like that. I just don't get that from that. It's a very
Yeah.
like personal experience, and I think it's because it's so character driven and
Maybe
focused,
it's, yeah.
you know, because like
Less thematic depth to talk about, perhaps.
yeah, and maybe there is the I think there is thematic depth in First Law, especially when and he gets into his later books. And it's not that there's not stuff to talk about. It's just that I don't find it as appealing because what draws me to those books for the most part are my like personal experience with the characters and like how do you quantify a character experience? This is the problem with Realm of the Elderlings too. Because if you do not have that infatuation with Fitz or whatever character that you want to point out, it is very hard to relay, I think, your feelings outside of good character work or good perspective writing or prose or dialogue. I think her dialogue is some of the best. But this is why it doesn't surprise me that when people do not like it, like they're like, I don't understand why people like this so much. Because like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
literary critics also struggle with this. Like they don't talk about characters a lot whenever they go over. Like if Harold Bloom read Realm of the Elderlings, if he was still around, he wouldn't talk about Fitz as a character at all. He'd be talking
no.
about the work and the aesthetics of it. So it's like it's a hard thing to quantify, you know?
Yeah, and I think you're right with character too. I was so disappointed when won't name names, but a booktuber I loved said they didn't like Fitz, and I was heartbroken. But I could see that point. If you don't love that character, that's the character in 9 of the 16 books. So it's hard to be in love with that series. But if you do love that character, you're gonna love it all for sure, like I do, obviously.
Yeah, and there's things that you can find whenever, it's a very character-driven story that you can find that is hard to put into words. I actually had someone ask me, because I talked a lot about how I felt like Realm of the Elderlings, and Malazan falls into this too for a different reason, but specifically here, Realm of the Elderlings, in a lot of ways, like, changed me. And I did think that it actually ended up making me a little bit of a better person. And it's really hard to explain why that is, other than I can just talk about like things like, like guilt and trauma and things like that. But without getting into like dumping out your personal life on the internet, it is hard to, it's hard to get into those conversations. So I have found that the longevity of conversation around things like Malazan, A Song of Ice and Fire, even like Ostenard, I have found that those have been bigger winners for me, even though I do love like First Law and Realm of the Elderlings a ton.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that's interesting. I really hadn't thought about it too much along those lines, but it is true. And the conversations are the fun part for all of them for me,
yeah,
because I always learn so much. That's why I'm glad with Malazan we're doing this group read where each month or each book we're going to be having a guest to kind of help us, a Malazan vet to kind of help us through it. But even just the discussions on the Discord and everything is such a valuable part of it.
I highly recommend inviting Alan from Library of Alexandria on, because no one that I know has read the books more than Alan. And I feel like he always gets left out of these Malazan discussions.
Actually, I think our plan is to bring him on for Dead House Gates.
Oh, fantastic.
And, yeah, I think that's what we're going to try to do is bring him in for that one, because I think that was a favorite of his, and I think he'll be a good guide for us.
Yeah, and he'll be very excitable about certain storylines that are some of his favorite in the series.
Yeah.
But it is funny to me, like Alan's read, I think the first 5 like 6 times, or maybe it's 5 times.
Wow.
It's just like, I don't know many people who can say that.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Tall Guy Reads has a great question. Says, Josh, what is your most anticipated read of 2023?
Malazan, really. I mean, we won't finish it, obviously, Alex, but I guess our schedule will get through the first 7 this year, I think is the way we have it sketched out at this point. But yeah, and that's covering the year. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. But yeah, I'd say that's probably my number one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Another book I know you're going to be reading, and this is what Commoner Trail Nathan has just finished. He says, right before the stream, I finished Stoner, which I had heard about, but picked up on a whim per your constant mention of Amazing Story. And you also had this picked for your January TBR by our good friend Joanna.
Yes, and I'm so glad she picked it. I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited. I know you gushed about it. She gushed about it. Alan, Alex, I mean, everybody that's read this book just sings its praises. And I'm excited to read it. Probably about a week and a half from now, I'm going to pick that one up. But it sounds like something I'm going to really enjoy. I haven't read as much literary fiction in the last couple months as I normally would like to. So I'm glad she picked that for me, because I've been reading a lot of SFF, which is fine, but it's nice to branch out. Like I mentioned, I like to read as many genres as I can. So looking forward to Stoner. And I guess the biggest thing that's surprising to me is when you read like the back flap and you see how short it is. And then you see everybody saying this is like Joanna, it was her best book of the year. And I see so many people, it's one of their best books of the year. And I can't wait to see what it's all about. It sounds fantastic.
Well, the whole story is told to you in the first page of the book. Literally tells you everything that's going to happen, and then proceeds to tell you, and somehow it's still entertaining. Do you ever do immersive reading? Do you ever do audio while you read?
I have not, no.
Okay. The audiobook is free and it is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I know that you said that generally you like reading books, so I'd say stick with what you know. But if you ever get the urge to reread, an audio reread would be great, because there's this academic setting, so they're very like they're squares. Like there's a lot of squares in this book, man, and the narrator, man, Mr. Stoner, like the way that he like makes them sound more squarer is fantastic.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I don't do that many audiobooks, but yeah, the narrator makes or breaks it, really. at least in my small sampling of them, because there's a few that I've DNF'd because I just couldn't take what the narrator was giving. And then there's other ones that I think one book I did a reread as an audiobook is I did Handmaid's Tale as a reread.
Oh,
and
nice.
it was actually Claire Danes reading it. And that book with a female narrator, because it's first person, I mean, it hit maybe even harder than reading it the first time did. So
Wow.
I think a reread with an audiobook might be something I start to explore, because I do love to reread quite a bit.
Yeah. Alan is the one who kind of put me on that path because, sometimes with audio, I feel like I don't grasp as much or I don't get the things that I really like to talk about. I really like commenting on writing. And sometimes it's really hard to know where that period is or the comma is whenever you're
True.
listening. So Alan does most of his rereads on audio, and I think it's a fantastic idea. So I'm hoping they do actually the First Law trilogy again this year, because out of all of the 10 books that are out, those are the 3 I can't remember anything from, which is weird. Like I remember things, but there's a lot that I'm going to go, oh yeah, forgot about that. So I'm definitely into that. I have not read Handmaid's Tale, but it's one that I'd like to get to.
It's short, it's quick, it's bleak. It
sounds perfect.
I mean, but it's just a fantastic work of literature.
Yeah.
And I tried watching the show, and what was interesting is I couldn't watch the show. A lot of the horrific things that I could read in the book, for some reason, seeing it on the screen, I couldn't stomach it. But the book itself, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
Dark, beautiful.
There is something about that for me as someone who's not a very visual reader, that I have found that my tolerance in books for like horrendous things is way higher than it is on the screen. And even in House of the Dragon, like I read Fire and Blood, a lot of that's, what they put on the screen. And some of that like made me physically kind of squirm a little bit. Also when I read manga, when I read Berserk, and there are stuff in there that is just heinous, and the visual medium evokes a different type of response from me that I'm not totally comfortable with. Like I'm not totally, I'm a very controlled person. Like I try to always have a hand on my emotions and my reactions, and I try to be very calculated in how I react to things. But manga, video, anything like that, it does tend to be a more visceral response for whatever reason. And I've read books that have way worse stuff. Like the Second Apocalypse is far darker.
I was going to say, from what I've heard, that's one of the darkest ones.
Very dark. Very, very. You know what it is? I think that there's a way that you can state things when it comes to books that can almost be poetically tragic or poetically disgusting even. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a way of getting around it, and almost the way that it is written or stated, it can begin the building blocks of how you envision it in your brain, whereas there is no interpretation when you see it on a screen.
That's true. And I think you're also right when you mention you're not a visual reader. I'm not either. I don't always picture things as clearly as a lot of other people do. So maybe that's another reason why I can tolerate horrific acts on a piece of paper, but seeing it on screen, sometimes I just can't do it.
Yeah, it can. I feel like I'm getting less. What's the word I'm looking for? Not stale, but like less numb the older I get. I think the older I get, the more I kind of realize my mortality is real, and I don't like watching things that I used to watch all the time. So,
yeah.
Trill Nathan says, Jimmy, I don't think you did a review of Stoner. Could you share what theme or what about it specifically made it so impactful to you? Stoner deals with a lot of things, but the one common theme that it has with many of my other favorite books is that it deals with death. And I also think that it is a huge warning to living a passive life and to not taking action into your own hands when you should. Stoner does have actions. He does step up at some points, but I think it is far too little too late for him in many ways. So for me, any books that take the time to deal with all aspects of being human, and that includes death, are books that I generally rank a lot higher than other works. And that's actually one of the things that I really like about Malazan, is that Malazan takes death and really takes it to a different level, where death is something different in that universe, which in any other fantasy series, I think could honestly be considered kind of hokey or cheesy, but Malazan does it in a way that I think is like really, really well executed. So that's something else you can look forward to, Josh.
I can't wait. I got a few more short ones in between, but yeah, I'll get there.
Maximus has a question for us, and we both have read Realm of the Elderlings here. So, reading Realm of the Elderlings, wondering what your favorite book of the first trilogy is, and what is your favorite sub-series is. So, mine is Fits in the Fool, I think, and my favorite book from the first trilogy is Royal Assassin, and it's still one of my favorite books of all time.
Same answers. Yeah, Fits in the Fool, Royal Assassin. Although I am very intrigued, having finished Realm of the Elderlings, what I will feel when I reread Assassin's Quest. Because I feel that so much of what happens at the end kind of changes your perspective in Assassin's Quest.
Okay.
Out of all the books in the series, I think knowing the end and knowing the entire story, I think that one's going to hit a little different. So that's one I'm most intrigued to reread, probably in the entire series. But yeah, Royal Assassin is amazing. Incredible.
Yeah, we seem to have the exact same opinions on that, because I also said that Ask Quest was like, which I just said Ask Quest, yes.
Yeah.
It is the one that I think on a reread that I think would be the best, just for many reasons. So now,
hey, Gary said it there in the chat there. Yeah, Assassin's Quest improves the most on a reread. So she knows.
we're too agreeable. We got to argue about something like running stupid. There. Lift some weights. I don't know. We got to disagree on something.
No, I always say, my sport is your sport's punishment.
I like that.
So yeah,
I like that. Stay ready. Alvin Smith III, which is such a cool name, says, has Josh read The Violin Conspiracy? I didn't know that there was a conspiracy surrounding violins.
I've seen that book around, and I probably should read it just because of the title, but I have not. Yeah, I think that's a newer one, I think. But yeah, I've seen that around, but I haven't read that one.
I know nothing about this, but one question I did want to ask you, that fact that you are into music and you educate and everything, is there a book that you feel does music the right way? And maybe we can limit it to fantasy even, but is there a book when you read it and you're like, this works?
So it's funny, Philip and I talked about this. I'm going to be on his Dear Dr. Fantasy like next week or the week after.
He's always stealing my guests.
Hey, but you got it on air before he did. But it's funny, we talked about this, and the answer is Robin Hobb. There's a scene in Fool's Quest, and there's a scene, you know the scene, where it's time fits, is all I can say about it. And music is a part of that scene. And I started reading it, and it started to unfold, and I started getting nervous because, frankly, most authors get music so wrong. And of course, Hobb got it right, and it was so beautifully done.
So when you say a lot of authors get it wrong, like, what about it? Like, what is
the way they describe it, or the way it never feels real to me? Being someone who makes music and has made music my whole life, it never feels real to me. And Stephen King sometimes comes close. And I think the reason is he's in a self-described bad garage band. He's played in a bad band of writers for years, I guess. So he's a performer. So he sometimes gets it pretty close. Like in the book, Bag of Bones, there's a musical undertone to it that I thought was extremely well done. But a lot of times it doesn't feel real to me. And I was nervous because trying to explain music with the written word is very, very difficult to do. And Hobb, of course, got it right. Yeah. Big surprise.
Yeah, Amanda, by the way, Shelf Unstable is Amanda, and she just posted a video that everyone should watch. She tier ranks her books, not from last year, but the books that she will be reading this year, and she's tier ranking them without reading them. Which was it was a delight. It was an absolute delight. And the idea is that she can, at the end of the year, she can go back and be like, how close was my tier rankings? Like, was I good at predicting this or not? And I thought it was a fabulous video. But she says, yeah, that scene in Fool's Quest is transcendent. It is one that lives rent free in my head for sure.
It's one of them. It's when I finished that chapter and I said, that is the most beautiful chapter I've read anywhere.
Wow.
And I still feel that. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. Yeah. So good.
Evie wants you to read Vanished Birds. And as someone who did read this, Evie actually won the Patreon pick. I do think you would love Vanished Birds.
Okay. I'm writing it down right now.
which also segues perfectly into Henrik's chat. And he says, is there any sci-fi you guys look forward to reading? And Vanished Birds is sci-fi. So it kind of fits the bill, but I'd like to hear another answer from you.
For me, actually, my number one sci-fi must read this year is Hyperion. I haven't read those 4 books, and it just feels like to me that Hyperion sounds like it's going to be sci-fi for me. That and Sun Eater. Sun Eater sounds like another one that I think will be great for me. So I hope to get to both of those this year. I don't have much. I do have some Arthur C. Clarke on the shelf that I'll be reading in the next couple months. I haven't read Rendezvous with Rama, that one, and The City and the Stars are the 2 I have on the shelf that I haven't read yet. But Hyperion's definitely top of my can't wait to read this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone says it, but I really like Hyperion. I think it was a great book. I haven't read on in it, but I am interested in reading the other ones. For some reason, I just haven't went back to it. I'm finishing up.
They're very different.
Yes, the first one is Canterbury Tales in space, and then from there it goes into much more of like the space opera epic sci-fi that many people know and love. I am definitely going to read at least book 2. I don't know about book 3 and 4. I probably will if I enjoy the second one, because why not? But for me, sci-fi that I'm excited, I'm actually reading Death's End right now, which is book 3 and yeah, and woo, that first chapter of Death's End. I don't think anyone else would find it remarkable. For me, it was the best chapter in the whole series and has little to do with the main plot, at least that I know of right now. But this isn't really a spoiler, but it's like a flashback to the Byzantine Empire falling, and it has nothing to do with the rest of the story. It is very strange. It is a short story essentially, and I thought it was just like one of my favorite chapters I've ever read. And I'm really enjoying those a lot. But the other sci-fi, I'm in a sci-fi mood actually, because I just read book 5 of Sun Eater, which I enjoyed. Wasn't my favorite of the series, I have to say, but I still enjoyed my time with it. But like Use of Weapons by Ian Banks is definitely on my list, and then Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe is also on that list. So I'm in a bit of a sci-fi groove right now, and I got a bunch of Philip K. Dick sitting downstairs on my shelves, and I need to read him for the first time. So I'm really, really excited about sci-fi this year for sure.
Yeah, I think one of your videos you mentioned that earlier about some of that sci-fi you want to read. But yeah, I have a few on the shelf, and then I have a few more. My TBR is dominated by fantasy right now, but I made myself a promise with my TBR this year, and I guess all my viewers can keep me to it. Every month I will read at least 3 genres, and I'm making my TBR every month has to have at least 3 genres in there so that I don't have just fantasy. But I told you about that month later in the year where I have like 4 fantasy chunkers that are like 2,600 pages. So I don't know how that month's going to go, but the rest of the year I'm going to be able to squeeze some other things in, I think.
You're going to have to wipe a lot of other things off your schedule in life,
Yeah.
Maybe run a little less, just a little bit less.
Yeah, maybe I don't go to work that month. I don't know.
There you go. Take sabbatical. It'll be fine. This is one I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if you've read it, but do you have any thoughts on the King Killer for music? That is a large part of the main character of the series, Kvothe. I always mess up his name, and people make fun of me in the comments. But I am very curious if you read Name of the Wind.
I have not.
Okay.
So I can't answer that one. I haven't put it, well, it's actually on the TBR now. I didn't put it on the TBR because I said I only want one George Martin in my life. But I've had so many people tell me that Name of the Wind is something that they think I'll enjoy. So I just put that one on the TBR. I don't have the next one. So I'm going to read it and imagine that there's not a book 2 yet until book 3 comes out. But yeah, so stay tuned on that one. I do hope to read that one probably late this year. But I've just heard so many good things about his writing style in particular, and I definitely want to read it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. It's not my favorite book of all time, but I had a great time with it. And I did not put in my top 10 for this past year, and someone told me it was a crime against humanity. They were kidding. It was actually a pretty funny comment. They said that it was a transgression that could not be forgiven. I was wondering if I would get any flack for that one, but no, it was all just fun, jolly comments. There is some really good music scenes in Malazan. Very, very much so.
Good to know. That's good to know.
At least one that really to me was very profound, and got the old tear ducts loosened up, a little WD-40 on them, and
yeah,
flowing.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that for sure.
A lot of Hyperion love in the chat. People are big fans.
That's great.
I don't know too many people that don't like Hyperion, which makes me want to be a contrarian, but I can't lie, and I enjoyed it, you know?
What I find interesting about it is I see a lot of people talk about it, and it seems like most people like Hyperion the most, but there's a large contingent that like the second book more. And then there's some people that even like the Endymion books a little bit better. So it's very interesting. I'm interested to see where I fall on it, because I'll read all 4 of them. But Hyperion itself, just the way the storytelling's supposed to happen, like Canterbury Tales, just sounds right up my alley.
Yeah. I think you'll have a really good time with it. Brent says, Jimmy, if you're feeling sci-fi, it's time for Pandora's Star. Yeah, Brent has mentioned this to me, and I've actually had a couple other commenters bring it up as well. And it's edging its way up my sci-fi TBR. My sci-fi TBR is nowhere near as long as my fantasy TBR, so that's a good thing. Have either of us read Murakami? I have not. Have you?
I've read 13 or 14 books of Murakami.
Oh, wow.
I love Murakami. Murakami is a very polarizing author. It seems like you either love him or you don't understand why people love him at all. And I love him. He's just got this mesmerizing voice that's just, I find so unique, which is amazing because he has a couple different translators. I guess that's a different conversation, but I don't know. It's just such unique storytelling, and it's a brand of magical realism that's unlike any other. I call it magical surrealism because he always throws such disparate elements into the story that it doesn't seem like those things should work, and then he kind of makes it work. But yeah, I love Murakami without a doubt.
Could you give me a kind of a synopsis of where I should start with his works?
So I would say probably the best place to start would be Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, which actually tells 2 stories: Hard-Boiled Wonderland, End of the World. One story's in our world and one is in a magical world, and the chapters kind of alternate, and of course they're tied together in a pretty clever way. That's a good one to step into because it's not real long. Like my favorite Murakami book is 1Q84, which is about 900 pages. So I can't recommend that for anybody for a first book for that author. But Hard-Boiled Wonderland's about 300, probably 350 pages. And I think it's one of those that if you like that one, maybe go to, I don't know, probably I'd say my Murakami's right here. I'd probably say go to Wind Up Bird Chronicle after that is another good one. But okay. Yeah, he's got a voice, and it's one of those you'll either connect with it or you won't. And I understand why people don't, because it's strange. It's like I said, it's magical surrealism. It doesn't really, a lot of the books shouldn't work like they do, but they just do.
Interesting. Yeah. The Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. That is one that Tall Guy Reads actually has suggested to me before as well. So I may start there, and I may try that out because I tend to, whenever like an author kind of comes out of nowhere, and not saying that Murakami came out of nowhere, but like starts to get like a little bit of momentum with recommendations, I always end up trying to fit them in where I can. And the fact that it's a standalone also helps quite a bit, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a few of his books that there's a character that ties in, but I read them totally out of order and it didn't affect my understanding of it. But yeah, he's his own voice. It's very interesting. But and it's interesting you hear his story and how he ends up being a best-selling author across the world. He's kind of a niche author, so it's almost like it doesn't seem like he should be this best-selling author because his books are so odd, but people just like him. They're just enthralling and mesmerizing. The cliche where you're reading a book and the world disappears around you, that's for me with a lot of Murakami, at least his best works. I mean, he has a few that I didn't like as much, but his best works, it's one of those where I'm reading and then I look up and it's 90 minutes later. So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've had that happen. Like that is very few and far between anymore. I think the last time it happened was with Second Apocalypse, probably with R. Scott Baker. And before that, man, I don't know. One of the Malazan books, probably. Yeah. I feel like that those experiences for me are fewer and far between now.
Agreed. Yeah.
Also because I read so much, it's very intentional reading for the most part.
Yeah.
I live a very scheduled life. So it's like, okay, I've read 75 pages and we're done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever the goal is for the day. So I think that in a way is kind of dampening the chances of something like that happening for me now.
Yeah, I was lucky. I started as an experiment. I picked for my first book of the year something that I think will be a contender for my book of the year. And I started the year with Lonesome Dove. And I had several times in that book where it was just, oh, I'm 30 minutes past when I usually go to bed because I was just enthralled in the story. So I'm lucky to have had that at least once so far this year. But yeah.
Yeah, Lonesome Dove is something that I would love to squeeze in this year. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, but if I get the time, like I'll probably end up going to the beach again this year. We do like a little family vacation every year. It's like becoming a thing. And that might be one I take with me to the beach when I have like just 8 hours a day of nothing going on. Because it's a thick book.
Oh yeah, it's almost 900 pages, at least the one I have. But it's so well plotted, it doesn't feel like a big book. And it's one of those, I heard all the hype and I thought, surely this book can't be this good. And it is.
And it is. All right.
It
That's
really
what we
is.
like to hear, Josh.
It's so good. Yeah. It's one of those where, I mean, last year, Shogun was my book of the year from about mid-January until I read The End of the Realm of the Elderlings. And then it went into second place. But this one, we'll see. We'll see if it wins the race, you know, running from wire to wire. It's going to be up there though, because it's one of those. I mean, I know it's so good. It's one of those I'm going to do a bunch of top 10 lists this year. And when I do my top 10 books, the question isn't, is it in the top 10? It's how high is it going to be in my top 10? It's remarkable. It really is.
Awesome. Love to hear it. Mitch says the sheer number of books Jimmy's committed to in the last. I'm not committing. I'm just showing interest. And I'll be honest with you folks. I'm in the middle of so many series. The next video that'll come out on my channel will be the series that I'm DNFing, that I'm putting off to a later date, and priorities, meaning like the next 2 years, I'm going to try to finish them up because I have to assume that my series are somewhere between like 13 and 21, somewhere around there. And listen, I used to be such a good scheduled reader. I would never start too many things. I would read standalones while I was reading a series. I was so good to go. And then I introduced the madness of the patron wheel, which I can't complain about because it has introduced me to so many new authors, so many reads that I would have never gotten to for years. And like Stoner, I would have never read Stoner, ever. So I can't complain. I love it. But the side effect is that you read a lot of book ones. It's gotten to the point now where there are people putting book twos on the wheel. things are in disarray, Josh. We're in a bind. Okay.
So I close out a lot of series, but my physical TBR is kind of like that right now, where I have quite a few book ones in there. And then I have quite a few trilogies that I haven't started yet. And of course, reading Malazan is going to encompass a lot of my life this year too. So I don't think I'm quite as overwhelmed with it as you are, but it's still a problem for sure. But I think books in general, we feed off of each other. We hear someone talking about a book that we love, and they're like, well, I want to experience that. We write it down. And last year, I have a TBR spreadsheet where I just put everything down, you know, and have it in there. And it's a someday spreadsheet, you know, not like this is my schedule. It's like someday I want to buy this book and I want to read this book. And beginning of last year, it was at 350 books. And then this year I read 124 books, and right now it's at 420 books. So it's like, okay, I read 120 books, but my TBR went up 70 books because of all of this. Everybody talks about books, and then people give me recommendations that sound amazing, and I write them down, and it's never going to end.
The sheer jumpstart, the jumpstart we've given to the book economy. Like we are saving Barnes and Noble.
Yeah. I mean, hey, when they say influencers in the book community, I think it's 100% true, because you see everybody starts reading the same stuff at the same time because someone does a video and they rave about it.
Do you know how hard it was for me not to join the A Song of Ice and Fire read along?
Oh, I'm sure for you.
if I wasn't doing the Bend the Knee podcast, I would have joined it probably. But I'm like, I'm good. I get my fix over there when I do that show. I'm good.
Yeah,
it'll be fine, right? But man, oh man, do I ever want to jump in? Because my problem is that I feel like I want other people in our sphere to talk about it and to be able to voice their opinions without me coming in and being like, Feast for Crows is actually thematically genius. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
same old shit. Like I gotta
Yeah.
let people just have their experience and do their thing, and new conversations to be had for all
Yeah.
the viewers. So I have kind of forced myself to not get caught up in that influence, even though it was very difficult to do. Hell, even the Malazan read along.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I wanted to pick up Gardens of the Moon right after I finished The Crippled Gods so badly.
Yeah.
I was like, well, this could be an opportunity, but the schedule it takes up a lot of your time, and
Yeah.
it eats through it. And I gotta say, it's nice to feel like I don't have too many big commits. Like the War of Light and Shadow read along with Janie Wirtz, which was supposed to begin last May. We might begin it. We
I was
might begin
wondering
it
about
this
that.
May
Yeah.
at this pace. Um, but even that, I think we're going to be taking a much slower pace. Like I think we would be
Yeah.
doing like 2 to 3 months per book, possibly, because those books are not just big, but they are dense. So
Yeah.
I don't feel super overwhelmed by that. But so besides having to wrap up a bunch of series, I do feel like free. Like I can try many different things
Yeah.
in different genres. I'm going to be reading Moby Dick this year, which
Oh,
I'm sure like many people just groaned at their monitors. Ugh. But
that's a
I'm excited.
polarizing book. I liked Moby Dick. A lot of people don't like Moby. I enjoyed it. I read it, it's 10 years ago, probably. I went through a big classics phase about 10, 15 years ago, and I enjoyed it. A lot of people don't like it, but I thought it was pretty great.
Alan loved it, and I thought that was
Yeah.
very interesting. You also like To Kill a Mockingbird, right?
Yes, that was my top reread last year. That blew me away. That
Hmm.
was one of the few books my English teachers made me read in high school and that I enjoyed in high school, but man, it's so good. Definitely a top 3 classic for me.
Yeah, I have actually never read To Kill a Mockingbird. I think I was supposed to read in high school, and I think I cheated. Pretty sure that happened. Forgive me if Miss Coons, if you're watching this, I apologize, but it's or Mrs. Patterson. I can't remember which class it was, but forgive me. I definitely cheated. So I've actually never read it. And hey, it turns out a lot of people really love To Kill a Mockingbird here in chat.
Yeah, well, they're right. It's pretty amazing. It actually surprised me how good it is.
Bard says Moby Dick is great if you ignore the 20 chapters about whaling.
That's true, but I mean, so many great classics do that. I mean, Les Miserables did a history of the sewers in Paris and a retelling of the Battle of Waterloo, and I still love those too. So, but yeah, I don't know if it's 20 chapters, but yeah, there's a lot of whaling in there.
We kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask you because I think this is just a fascinating question as someone that thinks about this all the time. But how has starting a YouTube channel around books and reading, how has it changed the way you read?
I think I'm probably more intentional in when I finish a reading session, just taking a minute or two to think about what I read, because I know at a minimum at the end of each month, I'm going to talk about each book.
Mhm.
I haven't done a lot of just single book reviews because I only want to do the single book reviews when I am gushing about a book, because this hobby is for me. I just want to spread the love of the books that I love. So I don't do as many single book reviews as a lot of other channels. But um, for me, I think that's probably the biggest thing as far as actual reading. I don't take notes. I don't do tabs. I don't do any of that stuff. But after every reading session, I take a minute or two and I just think about what I read, and I think about how it fits into the narrative, and if it's something that I would want to talk about to other people about it. It's probably the
Mhm.
biggest change for me in my reading habits. That, and I do read a lot more fantasy than before when I had a booktube channel.
And is that because like when you were getting into booktube, like you knew you wanted to be in the fantasy section of this thing we do, or?
No, it came hand in hand with, I took a huge break from the fantasy genre, and almost about 15 years, probably from about, I don't know the exact years, but from about 2003 to about 2019, the only two new series in the fantasy genres I read were Harry Potter and A Song of Ice and Fire. Those are the only new things that I read in that span of time. I did a lot of rereads. I reread, like I said, I've read Tolkien 4 times now. I reread some of my old favorites from the 80s, David Eddings, Dragonlance, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until I had more time on my hands during the pandemic that I started reading epic fantasy again. And I read Wheel of Time in like 3 months. And
Wow.
yeah, I just devoured it. Well, I went from a job that normally is about 60 hours a week for me to a job that was literally about 8 hours a week because we were virtual and all this stuff. So, I had time on my hands and I got back in, and that was the same time that I started watching booktube, because again, I had more time to have leisure time and to look at YouTube. And I discovered, a lot of the top channels, and everyone was talking about fantasy, and I was hearing about all these new series that I'd never even heard of. So it just snowballed from there. And it's been great because a lot of these series I haven't read or finished. So I was able to, jump in right
Mhm.
away and read The First Law. And I was able to jump in and read all the Sanderson stuff up to this point, and Realm of the Elderlings was done. And it's been great to jump back in and not have to worry about waiting for the next book, because there's all these great series that I just missed in my hiatus when I was reading other stuff. So it's been a lot of fun getting back in. It just, because for me, fantasy genre sparks my imagination like no other.
Hmm.
And that's one of the biggest reasons that I love it so much. And it was just one of those, as I branched out, I don't think I forgot that, but I think I forgot that,
Hmm. Hmm. No, I know exactly what you mean. I will say this about fantasy, and this goes for fantasy readers, this goes for fantasy YouTube creators, it goes for the books themselves. There is a lot more excitement around the discussion of these things, and when you read them, I don't know, a lot more energy, I guess, than whenever we talk about things like a Moby Dick, right? Like when I say Moby Dick, I feel like I need to say it very monotone and maybe like, have just a saltine cracker
Serious.
as I say, you know what I mean? But I don't know. I do feel as if there's something about fantasy that does spark joy in me and gets the blood going. What do you
Yeah.
think that is?
I don't know. I think for me, a lot of it is that's what I read as a kid. And we all know, even though nostalgia is false, it's very strong. And when I first experienced fantasy, in middle school, I just loved the genre and I read so much. That's about all I read, except for what I was forced to read by my teachers. My apologies to my teachers. I was a typical idiot kid, but through high school, that's pretty much all I read. Middle school and high school was fantasy, and I just devoured it. And so I think going back is almost, there's some nostalgia fueled enjoyment there for me. I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think for me, it was chasing the A Song of Ice and Fire high, and then slowly that morphed into something else, and I started looking for other things, and that is so important because I would have never found that high again, and there
Yeah.
will be never be anything that can match that because of how formative it was. Like, it's just not
Yeah.
possible,
Sure.
and I've kind of come to terms with that, and I realize that not every single thing has to be the next best thing.
Yeah.
As long as something I can take away from something to be excited about or to be contemplative about, I think that that is enough to warrant the time that I spent turning those pages. And that's part of the fun of it, is like with
Yeah.
fantasy and the imagination of it, is that you do get brand new things that you would have never imagined. And Dandelion Dynasty did this very well. There are things that happen in those books that I'm like, you can't do this in fantasy, but he does it. And it's
Well,
just
that's
crazy.
one of the things I love about modern fantasy, because obviously I'm kind of new to modern fantasy. Just not just the trope subversions, which are brilliant and amazing, but just the imagination that these authors have. And they're willing to go in so many different directions and so many inventive ideas. It's so exciting to me,
Yeah.
because a lot of the things that I loved in the 80s, they were pretty formulaic to one another. You read Sword of Shannara, it's Tolkien again, and Eddings even said there's a published article where he lists his formula for what he does, which is
Oh,
basically
no.
he puts 10 tropes together and there's his story. And it worked once. If you're an Eddings fan, I'm an Eddings fan too, but The Belgariad's the only one that holds up. The Malorian is a rehash, and then the other world, what was it called? The Elenium. Like, okay, you're trying to tell the same story for the third time now. It's not working, David. But it was very formulaic. So when I read this modern fantasy where it just turns things on its head, it's so exciting to me.
Yeah, and there's I know what you mean by that, because there is a market for those tropes. There is a market for those things. And that was one of Tad Williams talked. I said, what's the difference between literary fantasy and fantasy? And he was like, well, there's really no comparison, because one is a genre selling like a product, and that doesn't mean that there aren't just excellent things, brilliant things in that genre, but you are going to have a lot of stuff that is, hey, this is a dragon, and people buy it because it has a dragon on it. And ever since he said that, I feel like, to me, I feel like more forgiving of books that are a little bit more formulaic, that do play on those old tropes. And I almost see in some ways of keeping the tradition alive.
Yeah, I like the tropes. I think most of us like the tropes more than we would admit, because it's part of what the genre is. And I think of, so like my two favorite fantasy tropes are the quest trope and the fellowship trope. I can never get enough of those. I love both of those. And I was reading Lonesome Dove, and I was realizing that it was a quest with a fellowship. And I just said, it's not a fantasy tale, but it's two things that I love in a fantasy tale, and it just has to be set in a Western. So I think tropes sometimes do get a negative connotation to them, but they are what makes a genre are those tropes. So
that's 100% correct. And I don't necessarily think that tropes are a negative thing at all. And the fact of the matter is, it's like food. There's food I like and I dislike strongly, either way. And tropes are a lot like that, or ingredients of food, right? That kind of make up the story. What is one trope you're a little bit tired of?
I don't know if there's one I'm really tired of.
I think for me, it pops up, and when I see it, I know it. You know what I mean? Have you ever read something like that? And it's a trope, and you're like, oh God, not again.
Yeah.
Like I don't have ones that like, love triangle. I've kind of backed up. I was all the love triangle fans out there. I was really hard on it early on in my channel, but I've come to the conclusion that it can be done well. Like I used to just damn it outright. Like I'm being a hypocrite when I say that there are no bad ones, right? Because I used to slam love triangles, and I still don't prefer to read them most of the time, but I have backed off a little bit. I don't think that they're inherently terrible.
Well, I think any trope done well can be great, really, with the right author that can execute it well. Work. So
and that's what happened. I read some love triangles I didn't mind, and I was like, okay, maybe I need to back off a little bit. Not every single thing is terrible that has to do with a love triangle.
Yeah.
I really like this comment here from My K Check. Says, do you guys ever wonder how many books you saw through the year to your viewers? And I have never really considered this until someone posted their top 10 list under my top 10 video, and almost all 10 were books I had read and reviewed and been positive about. And I was like, wow. Oh, like you literally, like, not only one, great that you loved them, but like you read a bunch of books that I read, and I don't think it's a coincidence. It could have been, but you're commenting on my channel, so I'm going to assume that I had a massive impact on your reading year. And it's a little terrifying, but also very humbling.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, that's one reason I think it's fun to do this, especially when you love a book. And then I love it, like my Shogun review. The individual book reviews don't do real well on channels, but over time, people continue to go back to them. And so every week I'll get just a couple comments on that video, and oftentimes it'll be someone that said that, hey, I saw your video, it popped up, and it made me want to read it, and I loved it. And I love when that happens. So I never really thought of it more than just a handful of people, though. But then again, my channel is pretty small, so
you're growing. And I think that you have a pretty good dedicated audience. Your year-end awards were fantastic. I love that.
Thank you.
I love that you had actual, like, here are the candidates, first time nominated. Like, you should do that every single year. I thought it was excellent. I wish that I had the creativity to do something like that, because I thought it was really fun.
It was fun. Because I was trying to think about how I wanted to wrap up the year, and that's what I came up with. And it was fun to get Kayla and Theo to do the voiceovers and add a little bit. So I have to add a new wrinkle next year probably. But yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun to unveil it that way, and just think about the best books of the year, and yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun doing that way. I still have 2 more wrap up videos I have to shoot. I'm going to shoot one on Monday probably, but I was going to do a video of all the 5-star reads I had this year.
Nice.
Just like snapshot, real quick reviews. And then I closed out 13 series last year. So I'm going to do a tier list of that.
Wow.
And yeah, so I was surprised when I tallied it all up, and I said, oh, this is a video. So yeah, I have to do that too.
Yeah, I have a ton of videos I need to get out. I just haven't had any time lately, or honestly, the mental capacity to do it, just because life happens, right?
Sure.
But it's nice to know that you got some in the tank as a creator, like that you're not going up to make a video. You're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do today. Like, what am I supposed to like?
It's funny because when I started the channel, it took me 6 months to have the courage to turn the camera on. But when I finally started it, I hoped I would have enough ideas for videos. No, it's the opposite. I don't have time to shoot all the video ideas I have. I mean, I have just a lot, like I'm sure you're the same. You have a laundry list of all the different things, like, okay, what do I want to put out this week? And so I guess it's a good problem to have. There won't be lacking content. It's just, how much time do I have to devote to it?
Yeah, in some ways, I think being someone who does talk about books and is a part of, booktube, as we call it, there are like baked in videos that you can do weekly or monthly that people like. They're almost tropes in their own right. Like you got to do TBR, you got to do the wrap up.
Yeah.
You don't have to do these things, but I think the reason why a lot of people do them is because there's a certain level of comfort and structure to them. And just turning on the camera and getting on YouTube for a lot of people is a very hard thing to get started with. And it provides you a template of how to almost begin a channel and to have regularly scheduled videos without a ton of pressure on being the most eloquently spoken or the most original view on a work that you enjoy. It's simply just kind of sharing what you're up to, what you're doing, and people kind of mesh with you or they don't. And I think that's why on BookTube, a lot of the stuff is the same as far as like the stuff that's releasing. Do you ever feel like, because I've seen you do TBRs and wrap ups, like, have you ever considered not doing those to have more time for the other stuff that you want to do? Or do you enjoy doing those too much to cut them out of the rotation?
So I love the wrap ups.
Me too.
That's always a fun video to shoot, just because I get to talk about everything that I read. That was probably the first regular video that I put on the channel. I didn't start TBRs until July of last year, I think. And the reason is I didn't really have a structured TBR, but I'm kind of embracing that now. And I actually kind of like the structure. So I do those, and those are fun too, because I always get a lot of comments from people that have read the things that I put up in the TBR. So those are always a lot of fun. But those are the two. And then I do an occasional book haul. I don't do a monthly one or whatever. I need to slow down with those, to be honest, because TBR is a little overwhelming. But I have this really weird quirk. I don't know why. Ever since I was a kid, I don't put a book on my bookshelf till I've actually read it. So I have probably 30 or 40 books on a shelf in my closet because it doesn't get a spot here until I've read it. So that's becoming overwhelming over there. So I need to slow down a little bit with the book buying, but it's tough. Like, I wasn't planning on, like, Durfee finished his series, and I know first week numbers are important for authors. So I ordered his whole trilogy that week. That wasn't on the plan for this year, but I wanted to support him. So I got all of those on the shelf too. And then people send you things, which I'll never complain for that, because the best gift for a reader is a book. So, but yeah, it's a little overwhelming. So I don't do that many book haul videos. I got one more to shoot, and then hopefully not one for 6 months. We'll see. Don't hold me to that.
I will not. I also do love wrap ups, the in a nutshell videos that I do, because there's so many books that I don't have time, or maybe I don't feel compelled to make a review for, but I still want to talk about it because I spent time to read it. Very few books do I have literally zero to say about, but sometimes it's just not enough for its own video. So it can be tough. And then I obviously love doing the patron wheel.
Yeah. Those are always fun to watch too.
Yeah, and for me, I think the hard thing about it is there are times where like I only have a certain amount of time to get a video done, and I might have a more grander idea, but I am someone who like cannot break habits. When I form a habit, I do not break it. So having the In a Nutshell videos come out the first few days of the month, it's like, well, I would like to maybe do this other video, but nope. And then I feel like what happens is that other idea gets buried because then I got to do a couple of reviews and everything else. So sometimes I guess it's not so much the rigid template of booktube that we don't have to follow, but it's actually just the fact that I have a limited amount of time and I still stick to that template. That kind of something that's been kicking around my head a little bit, like standing out a little bit more and doing some more original video ideas. But we'll see. I can't break the In a Nutshell streak. I just can't.
No, you shouldn't. But I think it does provide some comfort too for the readers. I mean, or the viewers.
Yeah.
Because they know that structure. For my wrap ups, I always group them by genre and have my book of the month. And I'm sure there's certain viewers that like that because if there's a certain genre they don't read, they can skip to the next one. And hurts the analytics, but I don't really care about all that. As long as they're dropping me some comments and we can talk about books, I'm okay with it. But I think it's good for me as well, just to have that structure, to have beginning of the year, you do the beginning of the month, you do the TBR, end of the month, you do the wrap up. And then in between is when you, I guess, come up with the more creative and non-standard types of videos and just see what you prioritize.
Yeah, and try to figure out how limited I am by my editing or lack of editing ability. I have sat down to make a Malazan recap video so many times, like voiceover and editing, and I'll get like 10 minutes in and I'm like, it's been 5 hours. I've gotten 10 minutes and I'm through 1 page of notes and I have 12. I'm like, I suck at this. I am not good at it.
It's tough. That's why I marvel at the really good ones like Jay. I mean, his channel, his editing is just so ridiculously good every single video. And I generally do about 4 or 5 a year where I heavily edit. Most of the time it's just turn the camera on, maybe do a little splice here and there, and that's it. But the big editing ones, it takes time. I mean, my end of the year book awards, that probably took me beginning to end about 6 hours of work, which is a lot. I mean, I was off for 2 weeks, so that helped. But even so, I mean, most of the time it's about a 2-hour process from turning the camera on to editing and upload it and all that. So it's some time.
Yeah, I'm well spent though. I mean, I can't express to you how much I enjoyed that video.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, that was definitely my favorite to put out this year because it was just a lot of fun. Get to don the tuxedo, which I'm a musician, so I do that all the time. But it was fun to don it for a for a video.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
And one time this year, I used the green screen too. So.
Yeah, the green screen is something I haven't delved into yet, but it's something that I've considered. What I was going to do at some point was between me here, I was going to do a green screen with a bit of a higher shot, and anytime I would do a book review, the book cover would be on the green screen.
Yeah.
But I like Robert Baratheon back here talking shit to me, so I can't do that yet.
Well, it's one or the other. If you have a bookshelf that's a great backdrop, you use it. Or you can go the other direction totally, like Jonathan, Words in Time. He has just a green screen all the time, and it's always just exciting because it's usually the book he's talking about, and it's so visually just interesting to watch. So, I mean, there's different approaches.
It's probably better for retention or whatever YouTube calls that metric, for people staying longer, I would assume. But then it's a whole nother thing I got to figure out. So Key says, what about pre-Tolkien fantasy? Robert E. Howard, Fritz Lieber, Mervyn Peake, Lord Dunsany, am I saying that right? Etc. Back before tropes weren't really a thing in fantasy, as there was no fantasy genre in terms of market. I would think that there were still tropes from a lot of the mythology, but I know what you're saying. And yeah, good point. I will be reading Gormenghast this year, so I'm excited to try that out. And then Conan is something I've been meaning to read for a very, very long time. It just never seems
I have the really great leather bind up of all the complete Conan stories. I read those 2 years ago. Easily my biggest surprise of the year at how great I thought they were. I thought
Really?
they really stood up. I loved his writing style. Now there's some dated aspects to it, some questionable stuff for a 21st century reader, but overall, I just really enjoyed it. It was just raw, and it's the sword and sorcery, and there were some of the stories were just really strong, and it just really surprised me how much I enjoyed it. And I actually picked up the second volume. It's called Conan's Brethren. They didn't sell it in the States. I had to buy it in the UK, and it's all of the Solomon Kane and Kull the Conqueror and those stories. I've read a couple of those. Those are ones that I'll just mix in here and there. But yeah, the Robert E. Howard surprised me how much I enjoyed it. I don't know why I didn't expect it to be great, but I thought it was pretty great. I mean, they're short stories, so they're done pretty quick. But the novel in particular, Red Nails, I think is what it was called, was really good. So yeah, I'd recommend those for sure.
Yeah, Robert E. Howard's someone that comes up a lot of these times when you talk about authors today, or even 70s, 80s, talking about their influences. Steven Erickson's talked about it a ton for Karsa as a character, Conan being a driving force there, and we've all read many, many, many Conan stand-ins, right?
Yeah,
I think that the Dothraki are kind of inspired by that a little bit,
sure.
and A Song of Ice and
Yeah.
Fire, and many many other series as well. So it feels important to read. When I went to Pal's bookstore this past fall, my goal was to find some Conan, and they didn't have a single Conan book. And since
Wow.
then, I have not sought it out again. I'm a weird guy. Like, I like finding books in person still. Like, I like
Okay.
going and it's the hunt. I enjoy going to used bookstores, even Barnes and Noble. Different ones have different things. And for
Oh,
me, if I can see something physically, I will buy it.
yeah.
So I know I could just order it, but I always just end up trying to search for it. So Conan's one that I would like to do. And I don't think they're terribly long, right?
No, most of it's short stories. There's only
Yeah.
really one novel in there.
Yeah.
So you can pick up a collection of short stories, and even those are very, very short. And it's interesting you mentioned the bookstore. I just discovered in December. So I have a Barnes and Noble about 2 miles from my house, but I also have one that's about 10-minute drive from where I work, which is like 20 minutes on the other side of town. And I went to that one after work one day, and it was a whole nother world because it was so much bigger. It was about twice the size, and the offerings that they had, it was just remarkable how much more they had there. So I'll be making it's probably a 30-minute drive from here, but it's going to be worth it next time I do that. But yeah, I prefer to do the book shopping in person, but for me, I'm really particular about editions. So even if I'm in person, and I generally like my editions to match. So I might find the book, but if it's not the edition I want, I'll order that online or try to find it online that way if the bookstore can't order it for me.
You do have some gorgeous shelves. I was watching your January TBR video, and I was just mouth watering.
It's one of those when it's funny when I started, the house I bought, I've been here 4 years now. And with my realtor, when we were looking at places, we would look at this room. This is my study. And this was an important component of what I need in my house. And part of it was I needed a book wall, and he didn't understand until he saw the book wall. And then he said, okay, now I understand why that place didn't work and this place didn't work. It's just one of those. I've been a reader my whole life. I've loved libraries, and I've always wanted to have a home library, and it's just nice to be there.
Yeah, that's whenever I was buying a house this past year, kept saying, if we could just find a house with some shelves, I'll be good to go. And my
Yeah.
downstairs room has vaulted ceilings and shelves built in all around the fireplace and stuff. And
Nice.
it's like me and my wife just sit in there and we just stare. We're like, God, this is, the rest of the house could be on fire. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's fine. Who cares? But
Yeah.
that room is what sold the house. And my real estate is just like, we need to worry about this other stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
nah.
Yep.
It'll be fine.
Sounds like similar experience. It was one of those he said, I don't know if the house is big enough. I said, as long as the study's big enough. Living room's kind of small, but the study is perfect size. I got it all in here. Well,
brother, I moved into this house and I said, look at all this extra shelving. Oh, I'm good. Like, I'm good.
yeah.
I'll have shelves
Yeah.
for years to fill. Nope, they're all full.
No. Well, it's funny. The wall started off. I have 5 shelves on this wall. That's my backdrop when I shoot. And it's when I moved in 4 years ago, I had 3, and now there's 5. And I actually even have another one in the living room where all my nonfiction books are. So yeah, at some point it'll be another one, I'm sure, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, for sure. What brand of shelves do you have, by the way? Because they are
Actually,
just excellent.
these are IKEA. This is the Billy
Those are
bookshelf from
Billy's?
IKEA. They are.
Wait, they're not the black ones though, right?
No, they're the dark, like the dark brown colored ones.
I really like that dark brown color. I might,
Yeah.
because I have black shelves behind me clearly.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I'm not feeling it as much. I'm even
Yeah.
thinking about maybe going all short shelves.
Okay.
Because I got some stuff I need to display. Like I got the Skull Knight statue, which if you guys watched my tier ranking video, you saw it's
Mhm.
like yay high and it's like 50 pounds from Berserk. And I have nowhere to display it. I literally have nowhere to put it.
Yeah.
And it's like my prized possession. And then also I have like this Berserk bookend, which is
Yeah.
like Guts' sword, as you can
Oh,
see
nice.
here. But you can't see it, you know. So I feel like I'm in the I usually go all utility, but unfortunately there are some aesthetics that I do want to have for the channel. So it's like how much of this is like a prop room to actually storing books,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No doubt.
I put more time and thought into how my books are displayed than I do like my wardrobe because I never leave the house. So I wear the same thing all the time.
No, that's easy. Grab a shirt.
Yeah, I just wear like I've just decided
Wow.
like anytime I'm on the channel, I'm just wearing one of 2 Fantasy Network shirts I have until they fall apart,
There you go.
which I don't think they will because they're pretty nice. Thanks, Mindolin, by the way. Shout out to Mindolin, loyal subscriber. Sent me some shirts and swag a couple months back, and
Oh, that's cool.
oh yeah, I mean, at anything, can you believe the generosity of the community? It is
Oh,
insane.
it's funny. I put for the first time when I hit 500 subscribers, I put my Amazon wish list at the body of one of my videos. I don't even think I mentioned it. I might have mentioned it in the live stream we did. Thinking, well, maybe I'll get 2 or 3 books a year. I got like 5 books the first week that it was up. And then around Christmas time this year got, quite a few more. And it's just, it really is amazing. Just how supportive everybody is. And it's so much fun to just be part of that community because it is, we're all like-minded readers. And it's funny because we're all, we're content creators, but we're also viewers. We're consumers of this and we watch one another. And it's really a great community. It's one of I hear you talk about it and I think of it the same way. It's like one of my tribes, is
Mhm.
my book people that I have here. And I have, of course, my runners and my musicians and all of that, but and they don't always cross-pollinate. A couple of them do, but it's nice to have this community for sure because we just all love books and we love to talk about books and we love to watch people talk about books. I mean, the hours I spent watching Malazan videos before I even read the first book, which was last week. I mean, it's astounding if you think about it.
Listen, I'm not the biggest Wheel of Time fan, and I still watch Wheel of Time content because I love hearing people talk. Like, I prefer listening to people talk about Wheel of Time than I do reading the Wheel of Time
Okay.
because, like, it inspires so much excitement in people that I
Yeah.
just I like hearing about it.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. This is definitely a community that I feel like out of all the things I do in my life, the main ones being like fitness, jujitsu, mixed martial arts, and then I have coding, and then I have this. Those are kind of the things that I do. I feel like the people that I've met through reading are people who I've grown a like really deep sense of connection with more so than any of those other things. And it's the one that I feel the most proud to be a part of. And
Yeah.
it's the things that bother me the least out of groups of people because there's always things, right? There's always things about groups of people that can be frustrating or, social groups, right?
Sure.
But there's something about reading where I take a sense of pride in the community because it feels like it's really been built. And, that's probably confirmation bias because I've only been here since 2020. But it feels like something that has been kind of built from the ground up and it feels like it's exploded, especially in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So it feels like I have a bigger part in it. I feel,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel more like I belong probably than any of the other circles that I'm in.
Well, I think it's very well. I found it very welcoming as, my little channel starts to gain steam and everything. I just feel that, and it doesn't matter if it's someone who has similar numbers or has big numbers, you know, interacting with, you know, Mike or Murphy or whatever. It's really cool that we're all just kind of doing the same thing at different
Mhm.
levels of success. If you look at subscriber numbers as success, I don't necessarily do that because it's just a hobby, but um, it is really just welcoming. And I love just all the conversations, whether it's my videos or any other people's videos where everyone's talking about the books. And that's what's it's all about for me is the conversation.
Yeah, I would like to think that I was pretty open-minded prior to all this stuff, this craziness. But I am now even more open-minded to people around me, and not just open-minded to people that I agree with all the time, but also disagree with. There are people from different walks of beliefs in life of all types, you know, that I may have never thought that I could have had a meaningful conversation with. But turns out, you know, yeah, you can put aside a lot of the differences, and you can connect on a very human level over reading. And it just so happens to be fantasy books that we've done most of
Yeah.
that for. But I have found that also in discussing sci-fi and contemporary fiction, and it's just something really, really special. Also, big shout out to Big Al for the super chat. Appreciate you. Thank you so much. Very, very generous of you. Um, yeah, this is the place where I feel like I belong the most.
Oh, I think also, I think people that generally read a lot of fiction, I think tend to be pretty empathetic individuals. And I think that's part of it too. And I think a lot of times, even if we disagree about books, it's still just about books. And we know that it's art and it's all subjective. I mean, there's always exceptions to that rule, but I mean, there's books that have worked for me that don't work for others, and then books that I love that people don't love, and they're wrong, but you know, that's how it is.
I mean, there are times where, you know, as open-minded, as empathetic as we can be, sometimes we look at across the virtual table and we say, "What in the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
This is not my experience." Um,
But it's true. I mean, it's art, it's subjective. So one person's may love something and may not love the next person. So I don't know. It's just one of those. Anytime I do a book review and someone chimes in opposite, I just thank them for their comment. You know, I had one, I was real low on, I did a ranking of all the Ender's Game books.
I was going to ask you
And
about this.
yeah, so my final assessment was to only read 5 of the books. And there was one viewer didn't like that at all. And I just thanked him for his comment and, you know, go on your way. It's art and we disagree about things. It's fine. I mean, it's just that's how it is. We have different ideas and we're both right. Actually, speaking about that, that was my answer to a question. I did a video last year where I ranked all of the first law books. And someone commented just like a couple weeks ago about how his ranking, and it was almost like the opposite of mine. And I just said, "Hey, we're both right," and we both joked about it because it was true. He was right. His ranking was right. Mine was right because we're talking about subjective things, and we had things we loved and didn't love about certain books. And so, you know, it was a great interaction. It was just interesting that our ideas were very different.
I mean, I've had some of my best conversations on this show with people who their taste in books is wildly different than mine. I always point,
Sure.
you know, Bookborn is one of my favorite people to talk to. One of the best conversations you can have. I mean,
Yeah.
she's just fantastic, and we agree on some stuff. Like we both enjoy certain things about Joe Abercrombie, Dandelion Dynasty, but she reads a lot of stuff that I don't read, and I read a lot of stuff that I know for a fact she would think I'm detestable for reading, maybe.
Mhm.
And come from very different backgrounds, but my God, do we have a great time talking about books that we enjoy and bouncing things off of each other. Really, actually, Bookborn is probably one of my best examples of someone that I would have never thought I would have had so much fun talking to just because we're
Sure.
different.
Yeah.
But in those differences, we find some sort of common ground and always leads to a really engaging conversation. I have so much respect for her and everything that she does over there on her channel.
Yeah.
And it's books. Books are the bridge.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree 100%. Yeah.
Pat says, I'm late, but glad to be here. Been enjoying talking Gardens of the Moon with Josh in the Grimoire. Nice.
It's been fun. Yeah.
So Ender's Game is one that I read back when I first got back on the booktube. I didn't do a review for it, and I read the first Ender's Game book and didn't think too much about it at the time. You know, I think I gave it whatever rating I gave it. And then like 3 months later, I thought about it more and I was like, I don't think I like that book very much. I was like, I get it, and I understand why it is a big piece of
Yeah.
sci-fi history, and I'm sure there are people listening to this like saying that's heresy, but that's why it's the Fantasy Network, not the Sci-Fi Network. But
Yeah.
yeah, actually, I have soured on Ender's Game quite a bit since I finished it, and that's just book one, by the way. I've only read book one, which I know is a classic, but yeah, I don't know what it is, but the more I thought about it, the more I ended up not liking that book.
Interesting. Yeah, I still love Ender's Game. And there's a lot of that series that I like. I just, when I gave my final recommendation, there were a lot in there that I just felt were very skippable. And part of it was he came out with a book last year called The Last Shadow, which was tied in his two series together. And it was without a doubt the most lackluster conclusion to any book series I've ever read in my lifetime. So it's hard to recommend a lot of the books that lead up to that because the ending was so just not memorable. And I think I did my wrap up and I said, I got to the end and my idea was, and that's about all I had to say. Like,
Oh,
okay,
no.
that's the end. Okay. Well, there we go.
So I get the vibe from you that you're a pretty ending is a very important thing for you.
Yeah.
You like things to be completed and you like satisfactory endings, where I am very much the opposite. I'm very much, and probably because I'm a George fan, but like I just kind of flow. I just go with the flow. So you would agree though that endings are really important?
Without a doubt. And I think it might have to do with my history as a runner. Because in a race, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. You can I've had some great races, especially like marathon distance, where you feel great for 20 miles and then the wheels come off and you end horribly and it's a horrible race. And you can do that in a race. And if your last mile sucks, the race sucked. And I won't go that far with a lot of book series, but if the ending's really bad, it taints everything for me. So endings are important for me.
Do you ever feel like you're maybe missing out on books that by themselves stand alone really well? Like I'm thinking of like Scott Lynch, for instance, like the Gentleman Bastard series, like the Lies of Locke Lamora book one can kind of stand on its own without the finishing books, but really great.
I think so. And that's why I actually added that. That was another one. I said, just like Rothfuss, I don't need another George in my life. But I did add Name of the Wind, and I did add the just the Lies of Locke Lamora to the TBR, but not the series. So I'm going to read that like it's a standalone at some point and treat it that way because, I think you're right. I think it is because I would have hated if I had never read Game of Thrones because it's not done, because it's such an amazing series. You know, if I'd never experienced Storm of Swords, my God, that would have been a tragedy, really. So, I do get that, but I add ongoing series. It's just when an author hasn't done anything in 10 years, it's kind of hard to add them. If it's like I started reading Sanderson's The Second Mistborn Era, it wasn't done, but like I knew Sanderson was going to finish it because he writes.
He's chained to a typewriter.
Crazy, yeah, pretty much.
I do think about that with Stormlight, like thinking about how long it's going to be. Like I started it, I enjoy Stormlight quite a bit, and it's like, man, I'm going to be like a lot older whenever that thing finishes up. Like I might not have all the memories. I mean,
I plan on when the fifth one comes out, I think I'll reread the first four, just to make sure I'm there with it. But
yeah. Well, the nice thing is that fifth one kind of wraps up that first arc of the overarching 10. So I think that that's a good thing. I mean, Malazan does seem like to be something for you. I would imagine is going to work because it is finished. I think the ending's fantastic. They're not every single thread will be tied up for you though. I think that's important to kind of set that expectation, but the threads that matter, I think. Now everyone always has pet threads though. You know, like there's always stuff that like I care about this thing so very much, and like only 0.09% of readership actually gives a shit.
Sure.
It is just you're just one of those people, you know. I've done it so many times in series where I get attached to something, it doesn't get resolved, and I'm like, damn it. Maybe I got burned that so many times like that I just said I don't really care about endings anymore.
Maybe.
Someone asked what aspects of the book soured me on Ender's Game. It's not someone just souring like I thought it was terrible. It was just like after I realized like kind of like the pivotal moment of the book, and like what is like the twist, I guess I can say that. It's not very like the
Yeah.
twist of the book. And I thought outside of that, did I really enjoy anything that I read in it? And I just didn't like that. Like I realized it was all about that. And I said on a reread, would I necessarily even like would I care as much? And I felt like the answer was no. So that's kind of what has soured me on that book as I went on. And I've just read more since then. I would definitely reread it now. I read differently than I did 3 years ago. So I wouldn't mind rereading it and then giving what's book 2 called? Mike was telling me I would love it.
Speaker for the Dead.
Speaker of the Dead. Yeah, he said even if I didn't like Ender's Game, I might enjoy that.
Yeah.
So maybe that is something that I will try down the line. So there's another sci-fi I could read.
I think if you read Ender's Game from the lens of what he's talking about thematically, I think you'll love it. I really do. That's what blew me away in the reread. I mean, when I reread it this year, I knew I'd already liked it.
Mhm.
But in the reread, when I really thought about the twist and everything about the twist, because there's so many layers thematically of what happens there and what had happened, and it made me just think about so many aspects of that twist. That's what I loved most about the book. And that's why I enjoy it most. Speaker for the Dead is very different. So it's one of those, if you don't like Ender's Game, you may like Speaker for the Dead.
Nice.
But I wouldn't read on because Xenocide goes a way different. There's a place Xenocide goes at the end where I wanted to throw the book across the room. But,
that bad?
Yeah, it was one of those. I think I started my review with something. I always do the cold open, and I did the cold open, and I said, if you're liking a book and 90% of the end, it's great, and then something so horribly wrong happens that you loathe the book. Is it a good book or is it a bad book? And for me, it was a bad book because the ending was just so, it still pains me to this day.
Yeah, that's always rough. I have had a few series to kind of go that way. And I do think that like the line gets thinner as series goes on, right? Because like you do have to start bringing things to conclusions. You have to start giving answers, and the chance that you're going to miss with some readers or maybe even all of readers gets higher as you go on. And this is something that I have kind of felt about Sun Eater in a way. I love the first 3 books of Sun Eater, like love them. Book 4 I enjoyed, but there was like a quarter of the book that I really did not enjoy. Like I was much less excited about that. And then I just read Ashes of Man, which I do think is better than Kingdoms of Death, but there are answers and resolutions happening that I'm not necessarily like thrilled about, or thrilled about maybe the way we got there, or changes, things like that. So I always try to weigh that in whenever I give my thoughts and critiques about stuff I didn't like towards the end of series, is like the fact that it did have to be answered in some way, and maybe it's not the way I'd like it to be answered. So I always think that's a tough thing, especially with really goofy, no, I shouldn't say goofy, but like wild series, like with really wild ideas. And that happens a lot in sci-fi.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, sci-fi is all about the ideas. That's why I love that genre so much, especially reading. I've been catching up on a lot of classic sci-fi over the past 5 years or so. And those authors, that's all they were about, was the big ideas, because characterization's often not very strong. And like I read a lot of Asimov. Prose is not saying it's not strong is a compliment.
Journalistic.
Yes. Yeah. So, but the ideas are just so compelling. And so I overlook some of the shortcomings that I might not overlook, honestly, with some other books, but knowing, I guess, when it came out. But I guess that's what I enjoy a lot about the classic sci-fi that I've read recently.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely like part of the DNA of that. I had this conversation with, maybe it was Tad. I can't remember who it was, but I was kind of saying that like, because Tolkien took so much time and effort into his prose and in the style in which he writes, and how flowery Lord of the Rings is, and then everything after that tried to emulate that style. And I do think it kind of led, and Le Guin's also a massive influence in the way people write fantasy. And it's like, because of that lineage of the genre has always tried, I think, to veer into a more stylized way of writing, whereas sci-fi at times where things were just a little bit more terse, I guess maybe is the way I would describe it. I don't want to say bland. But like Asimov's writing is kind of bland,
Yeah.
right? And that lineage, I think, kind of played to a lot of what people were trying to emulate throughout the decade. So it's interesting that these two things that are so tightly coupled in a lot of places, especially bookstores,
Yeah.
they had very different lineages about the approach to how to write the story that is belonging in this genre. It's fascinating to me. And the best ones, I think, are whenever they kind of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And Ted Chiang is a great example of this. I think he's just an absolute phenomenal writer, and has some of the ideas, kind of like Asimov, that will just keep you up at night.
It's what you said reminded me of that essay that Ursula Le Guin wrote, from Elfland to Poughkeepsie.
Yep.
Yeah, that one, and it's very true. And I always lean on the Elfland side of things. I guess I like kind of that more formal type of storytelling, but but it is interesting because those two genres are linked. That the storytelling is very different. But I think nowadays, though, I mean, I wouldn't say that. I would say that a Sanderson style, he's more on the Poughkeepsie side of things,
I would
and
agree with that.
he doesn't write the not necessarily flowery, but the type of prose you're used to in that style. He's very direct, and it obviously works really well for him. I mean, he's one of our modern masters, but yeah, it is just interesting, all the styles. Then I think of like a Joe Abercrombie, who has, I think, one of the most unique narrative voices in the genre right now.
Yeah.
His is definitely a lot more modern. I kind of prefer not necessarily purple prose, but kind of a more antiquated approach. But when it's done well, it's done well, and that's all that matters for me.
Yeah, and it has to fit the story. The
Yeah.
writing has to fit the story. It's one of the big compliments that I pay. Not that it means diddly, but I do give that compliment all the time to Scott Lynch, that I think the Lies of Locke Lamora can only be written one way, and that's the way that he's written it. I think Erickson also is the only person that could have written those main 10. I know Ian Esselman exists, folks, but I'm just saying that I think Erickson writes in a much different way.
Yeah.
I love, Sarah said, by the way, Sarah, hello. She says, I just read my first Le Guin sci-fi, and it was definitely more idea heavy, but in a good way. And I have heard this, that
Cool.
like, do
Interesting.
not judge Le Guin just solely off of Earthsea. You need to go read her sci-fi to really experience her whole width of her breadth of her work, and that she brings a lot of really fascinating ideas in the Hainish cycle, I believe is kind of like her overarching series. They're not connected, but they're all in like the same idea or the same universe.
I haven't read any of her sci-fi. I read all of the Earthsea books last year, and but that's interesting. I'll have to check those out because I did enjoy Earthsea, a lot of it.
Same.
And yeah, it's definitely a memorable read, and definitely will be something I'll reread at some point.
Yeah, I very much enjoy Earthsea. I need to read book 4 and then the remaining stuff
I
as
think
well.
that's my favorite.
Yeah,
Tehanu?
Tanahu? Is that how you say it?
The first, the second, fourth, and fifth books are my favorite. The Tombs of Ottawan and Tehanu, and then the fifth one's actually short stories, but the world building's so good, and I was just blown away by it. So
yeah,
those were my favorites. But I enjoyed those. I enjoyed her writing quite a bit.
Yeah, I've had so I've been like praising Le Guin a bunch in the last probably 12 months, and Tombs of Atuin made my top 10 books of the year. I loved it.
Yeah.
But I've had so many people, I feel bad because I feel so many people like go into it expecting more because of how much I loved it. But it is a very simple story.
It's very different, and it's quite dense. I found it took me at least 40 or 50 pages in The Wizard of Earthsea to just get. I always call it musical analogy. I always call just the author's rhythm. It just took me a while to get into the way she was writing. And then once I got in, I was just totally into it.
See, I felt like I could pay attention to that portion of it because I do think it's a simple story as far as like what happens at the beginning, in the middle, and the end. Because like when you get done with an Earthsea book and someone asks you what it's about, it's like pretty straightforward, I think. But the way she tells her story and the way that she exposes you to Earthsea is, for me, magical. Like, I just think it's beautiful. It's not the most flowery prose of all time either. Like some people expect it to be that, but I don't believe that all great writing style goes the way of purple. It doesn't have to. So I think Le Guin balances on that line very, very well. I'm a big Le Guin fan for sure.
Yeah.
Also,
I enjoyed those quite a bit. So I'll definitely have to look at her sci-fi at some point.
Yeah, Bart, I'm not disrespecting Asimov. I'm just saying his
No, I
writing
love
style.
Asimov.
I love the Foundation trilogy. Actually, one of my
Yeah.
most successful reviews on this channel is the Asimov trilogy, which is
Yeah.
interesting. Like I wouldn't imagine people would want to hear what I have to say about that, but one of my favorite reviews I also did as well, though. Asimov is awesome. I'd like to
Yeah,
read
I
more
read,
about his writing.
well, I read one of the lesser Asimov, so I won't bring that up, but no, I will. I read the Empire trilogy this year, and it wasn't up to the level of the Foundation or robot novels, because I'd
Mhm.
read the robot novels the previous year, and I love Asimov. I mean, Foundation's fantastic, and the prequels are great. I enjoy the sequels too. I mean, all 7 are pretty solid, really.
Did you try out the Foundation TV show?
I did, and it was different. Once I got over that this is different, I actually liked it. I thought production values were pretty solid. Um, it wasn't telling the story I knew, but it was telling a pretty interesting story. So I don't
Hmm.
know if are there more seasons coming out? I don't know.
I don't know if it got canceled or not. I have
Yeah,
to imagine that show budget was insane because it
it
was a
had to have been.
gorgeous
Yeah,
show. Gorgeous. Um, I thought I gave up after 2 episodes, not because it was terrible, but because I felt apathy. And with television, I'm
yeah,
so much harsher of a judge. Like, not that I
yeah,
know what I'm talking about, but I just mean like if I know I'm not being, if I'm looking at my phone, I'm done. Like it's over.
yeah, yeah. Might as well be.
Yeah. Fit to be Read says Asimov's writing style was very intentional, as its goal was to present his ideas to people as directly as possible as he felt it. And I think that, yeah, he 100% was
Yeah,
intentional in that. And I kind of feel that way about Earth's Remembrance of Earth's Past, which is Three Body Problem. It also at times does have like a line where I'll go, that was nice. But sometimes because of the
yeah,
translation, it's a little choppy
yeah,
and downright sometimes like not good, I would say. But the ideas are so rich.
yeah.
And even the themes in it are, I mean, really powerful stuff, thought provoking. And I forgive all things that I dislike about the writing because I'm just so enamored with the ideas of it.
I always wonder with translations because I'm on this quest to probably my favorite classic is Crime and Punishment, and
Mm,
I my plan is with Crime and Punishment is to read it every 5 years for the rest of my life with a different translator. Because the first time I read Crime and Punishment, I didn't like it. And then a friend that I trust said, "No, you need to read this translation." And I read that translation. It was the Pavir and Volohansky who do all the Russian translations nowadays, it seems like. And I loved it. It was just fantastic. And it became a top 5 classic for me and might be my favorite now. So um, I'm always curious about if I don't like a book that's not in its native language, it wasn't written in English, if it's the book or if it's the translator. And I hate that
yeah,
because until you learn the language really, really well, you're never going to know. And that's not going to happen, you know? So, um, yeah, I always wonder with that. I wonder with that, like some books I didn't like. I didn't like the Witcher novels. And
oh,
I wonder if the translation just didn't work for me or if they're just not great novels. I really don't know because I love the short story collections. I don't know if it's the same translators, but
hmm.
I didn't like the novels at all. They didn't really do anything for me. And but back in my mind, I'm thinking, well, a lot of people love these. Maybe I just didn't jive with the translation. So I don't know.
Yeah, that is always a tough thing is finding the right translation, and sometimes it can be so overbearing that I end up just like passing up things because of it.
Mm,
I do want to read Crime and Punishment. That's definitely up there for me with the classics. So I'll
yeah.
have to make sure I get the good translation of it.
Yeah.
Uh, Rogue Six says apparently I'm Claus now. I read the first 2 Earthsea books and didn't like it. No, I actually can understand why someone wouldn't like Earthsea,
Yeah.
because they're very stylized, like heavily stylized. Um, One of the things that I will say about Le Guin for your future reads is that I believe that Patrick Rothfuss was trying to emulate a lot of what she did in her writing style
Mm,
and the way we understand like how currency kind of works and like the world building on that level, like on those weird details, he also does that. So I'll
interesting.
be curious to see if you agree with that whenever you eventually get around to it. But yeah, Rogue Six, totally, I totally get it. It's not one of those things where I do think that like Le Guin has a lot of really great things to say in her essays about the genre, which obviously I'd be interested in, because like this is what I do. This is what we do, and we
Yeah.
like these things.
Yeah.
So even if you do not enjoy her stories, I still think that she's such a monumental figure in the fantasy genre that, quite frankly, doesn't get enough due. And I could totally understand why you don't like her books, though. Like, I could totally see it. I've also seen a lot of people who don't like Earthsea, or vice versa, like her sci-fi, or the other way around. So maybe the sci-fi will be more up your alley, or maybe not.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sarah Reese says, I think people associate Earthsea with being middle grade, and they expect something that's really different from what you get.
Yeah, good point. That's definitely not middle grade level.
I have definitely had people say that to me, and I always just I'm always like, it's interesting, because in Learning to Steer the Craft, which is her book on writing, which is fantastic, she actually talks about like some of the blocks as a writer. And some people might be listening to this, and if you're trying to write fantasy, maybe this will be great advice for you. But she says that one of the approaches to get yourself to really write the story that you want in the way that you want it, in the way it should be told in a fantastical element, is to pretend you are telling it to a kid. And that is because you actually allow yourself to get into a mindset where anything is possible, and that these fantastical things can, like, you almost have more confidence speaking to a kid than you do an adult. You might be shamed for this fantastical idea you have in your story, because an adult would laugh at you and say it's nonsense. So to give yourself permission to write the fantasy as it ought to be written, as George R. R. Martin would say, she says, imagine you're telling your story to a group of kids. And I think that definitely comes through in her writing, and I think it's fantastic advice.
Yeah. Wow. I haven't read that one. I guess the only one I've read is the Elfland to Poughkeepsie. But interesting. Is that a book, or is that an essay?
It is a book, and
okay.
yeah, it's Learning to Steer the Craft. She talks all about prose. I think it's a wonderful book. For me, like, I do attempt to write and stuff, but like my main goal is just to understand why I like what I like, and why I dislike what I dislike, and also things to look for that I like. Quality, like how do you find quality in what you read? And for me, I love reading books on the craft. I like On Writing by Stephen King. I like Steering the Craft, John Gardner's book on fiction. Philip recommended it to me and read it. I thought it was also excellent. I'm always reading like literary critical theory. Like, I'm just always trying to immerse myself in these things, like where people see a some sort of tangible quality in a work, and I don't see it. For instance, like Blood Meridian is a really good example. I read it and I was like, well, that wasn't very fun. And then I reread it and I was like, oh, like, and it did take some effort, to be honest with you. And not everybody wants to do that, but that is something that I'm interested in, because I am a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, you were raving about that one, and I don't know if it was the review or just one of the wrap-ups when you were talking about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to talk less about McCarthy, because I don't want people. I feel like everyone's like, we get it. Like, shut up, Jimmy. Oh, Suttree. Yeah, we get it.
Like Alan with KJ Parker, right?
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm never that bad. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for the super sticker, man. It's very generous of you. I appreciate it. Have you read any Lois McMaster-Bujold?
I have not. No.
Okay. That is one that it gets related to Robin Hobb quite a bit that I'll be checking out this year. So I figure I'll give you the deets. I'll give you the lay of the land.
Hey, anyone that compares favorably to Hobb, I'm all in.
Yeah, I know that me and you connect on that level.
Yeah.
So I do have to ask you, are you going to read Robin Hobb's sci-fi book?
Which book is that?
Perfect. I was hoping you would ask. Let me pull it off my shelf for you. It is absurd.
New book. What's this all about?
Alien Earth by Megan Lindholm.
I don't know about that one.
It is a book that is obviously in her other her real name, her author name, but there are certain copies of it that actually say Robin Hobb on it.
Okay.
This is not one of them, but as you can see, very short.
Yeah.
And Robin Hobb wrote a sci-fi novel, standalone. It is less than 400 pages. It says, far from home, the human race tries to atone for killing Terra thousands of years ago. Rescued by the enigmatic, I don't know how to say that word, in their mysterious beast ships, they have been inserted into the fragile ecologies of the alien twin worlds of Castor and Pollux, where they must make no impact, where every drop of water must be returned. Humanity has adjusted or tried to. I don't know. I don't know what to expect from this. But we got to read this.
I have Wizard of the Pigeons on my
Yeah.
shelf. I found that one. That's one of hers as Megan Lindholm. No, I'll read everything for sure.
I,
But
I
I'm not trying to read it quickly though, because I don't want to get to the point where I'm out of Hobb books. I mean, I
yes.
can always pull a Derry and reread, but even so, like I'm doing well with Derry and Scott and a whole bunch of people. We're doing Soldier Son this summer. We're doing June, July, August, that trilogy. The other Hobb trilogy that's not Realm of the Elderlings. But I'm going to take my time on the Megan Lindholm side because I don't want to run out of Hobb at this point.
I feel that way with Tad Williams. I love Tad, like
Yeah.
clearly, but he has so many books, and I'm happy about it because like I'm just slowly kind of making my way through. So this year I'm doing Shadow March. I'm on book 2 of that, and then I will probably start Last King of Osinard towards the end of the year, which is going to be so epic. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Like no one does like good old classical epic fantasy like Tad, in my opinion, but like without it feeling stale. Like he always does some weird shit that I'm like, why would you do that? And I love it. Like, like he has little people that like ride little horse, crazy stuff, just insane stuff. I love it. I think it's like a touch of silliness that is missing in a lot of epic fantasy.
Well, and I've heard he's one of the bridges really from classic and modern. I actually have on my gargantuan shelf, I have Dragonbone Chair. So I haven't read Tad Williams yet, but I will this year. Matt from Matt on Books, we're going to buddy read that one at some point.
Nice.
So
if you don't like it, don't tell me. It'll break my heart.
No, he's another one. I guess just because I've been a reader for so long, I have a general idea if I'm going to like something or not, and I'm usually pretty accurate with it. It's pretty rare that I even put anything on the TBR that I don't think it's going to be something that I enjoy.
His writing is excellent in Ostenard. He actually writes a little bit differently in Ostenard than he does his other books. He puts a little bit of that Tolkien like flash on it, and it works. It works really well for me and for a lot of other people.
I marvel at authors that can do that.
Yeah.
Like I read about when I read Chronicles of Amber, I did some reading about Roger Zelazny, how he was very experimental, and based on what his project was writing, he would write in a different writing style.
Yes.
Or I think about, what was it? Stephen King recently, something I read by him where, it was Billy Summers, where Billy Summers in the book, the character was writing a book, and the portions that he was writing was a totally different author than Stephen King.
Wow.
I just marvel at authors that can do that, because I think it's hard to just simply write and then write in 2 totally different styles. It's beyond me. That's why I'm not a writer. It's why I'm a musician.
It's very impressive. It'd be something like a musician almost like switching instruments or genres, even possibly, or changing their singing voice. I'm so glad that you've read the books of Amber. I'm on book 3 and I love it. And Lord of Light was also fantastic.
Yeah.
Roger Zelazny's a king.
It's great. And I look at those 5 Amber books as it's kind of epic fantasy in disguise. It's kind of like a 900-page epic that's just broken up into 5 parts, but it makes it just hit differently because it is broken up into 5 parts.
Yeah, they're so easy to read, and his writing style for when they were written is so fresh and so modern still. Like you could tell me that was published 10 years ago and I would have believed you.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. He is something special, and I would like to make continuing that series a priority. The fact that there's so many, it's only 900 pages, but that's another series. I don't think blitzing through those is a great idea. I think that there's a lot of stuff that's intentional there that could just kind of fly by you because each one is so different. Like
they really are.
They're wild.
It's still one narrative, but it's and I thought they're so inventive too.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I only did the first 5. I had a good friend that told me to not read the last 5, so I'm trusting him in that one. But the first 5 were fantastic for sure. And it's 2 different arts. I think the second is a different character.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Character, yeah.
Interesting. Did you notice a little bit of inspiration for Wheel of Time in those first few?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see that. It just popped into my mind. The other author I want to read more of, I read in high school. I only read 2 of them, but I have the first 8 because of the omnibus, is Michael Moorcock. That's another author that
Yeah.
writes these short books, but tends to do just different things. And I know he was kind of at odds with Tolkien, and I'm kind of intrigued by that, even though I, of course, love Tolkien. But looking forward to reading those Elrics this year, too. And those are short. Those are all like 150, 200 pages as well, just to squeeze them in there between some of these chunkers that are on the TBR.
Well, we should discuss him because he's on my new authors to read this year. So I will be reading Elric, at least one of them this year.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I have read Epic Pooh and his essay against Tolkien, which I think is interesting. I have heard since the fact that it is speculated that he actually did not read Lord of the Rings, which I think is, I don't know if that's true or not, but that is something that has been said, that he decided just to skim Lord of the Rings. But his argument, and I asked Tad about this because Tad actually is a really he loves Tolkien, but he's also like had a personal relationship with Michael Moorcock, and he was saying that it was a lot more based around Tolkien's approach to class and classism. And it is like the way Tad explained it to me, I was like, okay, now I kind of see, because there's parts of that essay I don't agree with. I think that he heavily discounts the environmentalism theme in Lord of the Rings, like green is good. And I think that he very much misrepresents Tolkien's arguments or what he intended with that. But he has some points as well. Like he has some points. And I thought Tad was a great person to kind of ask about that, because he has stock in both people. You know, Tolkien was the most formative thing he had ever read, he said. So it's interesting. I'm excited to get into Moorcock because he is he's someone that has inspired a ton of things. So
yeah.
Oscar, thank you for the 10 spot, my friend. Appreciate it. Oscar's been around. He's still around even after I read The Pariah by Anthony Ryan that he recommended, and I didn't like it. He's still around. So Oscar, thanks for being a good sport, man. Appreciate you.
I feel you. I hate that when someone recommends something and you're not hot on it.
Yeah. You know, it's just part of the reading game, you know, and sometimes you can read a book and it might not be for you, but it was decent. You know, that happens to me all the time.
Yeah, sure.
Sarah says
you can often just even see what someone else might appreciate about it, even if you don't.
I think doing what I do and trying to do reviews and stuff, I actually think that's part of my job. Like I say job loosely, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
sure.
Part of my role to be someone that talks about a whole bunch of different books is to try to find things for other people. And it actually makes reading a little bit more fun too, because if you're not personally enjoying it, I can start imagining people who might, and it helps me get through some of those books that I may not be like riveted by.
Yeah, sure.
Sarah says Moorcock essay collection is really good. Elric has been fun. It's not a favorite for me, but it's nice to see the influence he's had on the genre. And that's kind of what I'm expecting as well. Maybe I'll be surprised and he'll end up becoming a new favorite author, but just so many of my favorite authors, you know, reference him. So he's definitely important.
Yeah. I'm just curious to see what it's all about, because I read him in high school, but I don't really remember much at all.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Sarah says a lot of things, says that. Well, Josh, this has been an excellent conversation, man. I feel like we could go many more hours, but I won't take up too much more of your time. I would love to maybe reconvene and talk about something specific. So maybe Elric might be that thing.
Maybe that sounds fun.
But it was a pleasure watching you go through Realm of the Elderlings and you sharing your experience. So I thank you for that as someone who did, you know, personally connect with that series on many different levels. It's always fun to watch other people go through that. And I am wishing you the best of luck on your Malazan journey. And I just promise me you'll get the Memories of Ice. Just promise me that.
There's no doubt. I'm all in for all 10. I have no doubts that
let's go.
So.
Wonderful, man. Well, where can people find you out on the internet?
Red Fury Books and Twitter. That's about it. Although a bunch of Discords. I'm in Jimmy's Discord, and then Grimoire. I'm doing a read along on the Keymark Discord right now too. So hop on any of those. I'd love to chat about books just like we did tonight.
Yeah, it was a great time. And Josh's channel is linked with his name down in the description. So make sure to go check out his videos. He is one of the more wide read people that I know here on BookTube. And I think that you could get a lot of value from his content. And hey, he happens to also be a hell of a guy, which doesn't hurt at all. Amanda, thank you so much for the 10 spots. Says great time joshing with nuts. I like it. All right. Well, Josh, thank you again for coming on and give me some of your time on a Friday evening. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend, man.
All right. Same to you.
Chat, thank you for being here and being the third guest. I love you so much. Thank you for giving me something to distract me from this hellacious week that I've been having and getting my mind off work. I know Josh appreciates it too. But always, thank you so much for being here and sharing your evening with us. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page.